Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to CAD Live. It's episode 91, I think. So we're getting through nearly up to the golden 100. If you are watching this live, welcome. Thank you for coming along. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notifications bell so that you know as and when new broadcasts are coming up, new videos are coming up on the channel. If you are not watching this live and you are watching this on the replay, then thank you very much also for joining, or rather for watching the video. And I hope you get a bunch of amazing value from this. And listen, I mean, this is a subject. Let me know if this is a little bit ratey, by the way, because I know we had some problems with the picture yesterday. But let me know if it's okay or if it looks a bit funny. All right, so look. We had to sort of cover this, didn't we? Everyone's talking about the big interview that took place between Meghan and Harry and Oprah Winfrey. I watched it earlier in the week. I am British. I'm sitting here in London. It's something that a lot of my compatriots are discussing in this sort of space online, if you like. And so I felt like it would be remiss really not to have a chat about it. We are going to be talking about it, I believe, tomorrow though, on Rule Zero, which will be on he's saying it's blurring. Okay, yeah, sorry about this. Try and bear with me because I know why it is, and apologies. But I'll try to just stay still so it doesn't make that much difference to the quality of the video. So yeah, everyone's talking about it. We're going to be discussing it tomorrow on Rule Zero, which I think is on John MLD's channel. So look out for that. But yeah, I just thought we'd have a chat about it, see what people think. Obviously, keen to hear your opinions. So do stick them in the chat. Do let me know your thoughts, your comments, any questions that you have. And, you know, as well, equally, if you've got questions about dating and game and those things, then we can discuss those as well. This doesn't have to be just a complete Meghan fest. But obviously, this is a topic that a bunch of people are interested in, and rightly so. And I think this interview has shocked the world. And it seems to have shocked the world in two directions equally, depending on who you are and what your view on this stuff is. I was just reading an article before coming on here about attitudes to this in the UK. And I think this came out the other day, actually, but there's an article on Sky News here, and it says, Harry and Meghan, UK public opinion of couple worst ever after Oprah Winfrey interview, poll suggests. And so, you know, not everybody in the UK is entirely happy about this, and you've probably heard about Piers Morgan being fired from his show on Good Morning Britain. Piers Morgan, of course, said that he basically didn't believe Meghan, and there were, I think, 41,000 complaints from members of the public, and also from Meghan apparently herself. This is the story that's being reported anyway, and he was effectively pushed out from his broadcasting job because the comments that he made, particularly regarding the mental health side of things, were not welcomed. And so he got pushed out, and he had basically said that he didn't believe Meghan, and for expressing that opinion, he lost his job. Now, he's a millionaire, so I doubt that he's going to be losing too much sleep over it. But nevertheless, you know, this is what's happening in the media now. This is the state of things as we find them. So just looking at this article in terms of public opinion here, it says, it talks a bit about the interview, and it says that actually support for the Queen and the Duchess of Cambridge appears, that is Kate Middleton, or the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, so Wills and Kate, seems to be unchanged and very positive. 48% of people said they had a negative view of Prince Harry, compared with 45% with a positive view, giving him a -3 net score. So people are going off Harry. It's the first time attitudes have been more negative than positive towards him, according to YouGov, who did the poll. Meghan's popularity also appears to have declined heavily after the interview. Only 31% had a positive opinion of the Duchess of Sussex, while 58% of the survey's British respondents viewed her negatively. So 58%, nearly 60% view Meghan negatively after the interview. The net rating is 27 down from just 14 down just a week ago. But, and this is the interesting bit, there's a real divide here between ages, okay? And what looks like is happening is that, I'm just going to see if I can, I'm just going to do that. Let's see if that helps out with the bitrate problem a little bit. I hope it will. Okay, so what's really interesting here is that age plays a part in this, okay? And what it says is that most 18 to 24-year-olds, 55% like Meghan, and only a third, 32%, dislike her. So we're talking here about really Generation Z, aren't we? And I mean, does that even cut into millennials? It's young millennials, maybe, but Generation Z and maybe a little bit of millennial. 55% of them like her, and only 32% don't. The same is true for Prince Harry, with 59% having a positive view and 28% having a negative view. But, and this is the interesting bit, over 65s, however, mostly dislike the couple. For Harry, the feedback was 27% positive and 69% negative. So 70% negative opinion about Harry from the over 65s. And for Meghan, it's 83% negative with only 13% positive. So it looks like there's a real divide here between the generations. And it seems like the older people basically aren't buying it. The older people, particularly the over 65, so we're talking, you know, even older than me, they're just not buying it. They're just not feeling Meghan. They're not particularly, and they're not feeling Harry, and they're not feeling them as a couple. Okay, younger people all over it. Younger people, they're just like, yeah, you know, fine, we're on board. We're Team Meghan. We're Team Harry. So it's really interesting how this divide has made itself manifest, and it's kind of obvious, isn't it, when you think about it, why that is, because the attitudes of the young in the society of Britain and also in America and many parts of the Western world are very, very, very sympathetic to people who cast themselves as victims, let's say. And that is effectively what Meghan and Harry are doing in that interview, isn't it? And I don't think it's controversial to say that. I think that's pretty clearly what they are doing. The tenor of that interview is them, so Meghan at first, and then obviously Harry comes in and has his say. It is them describing their victimhood as far as their experience within the palace was concerned. And that plays very well with this younger demographic, this 18 to 24-year-old demographic, and it plays very badly with the over 65s. And I suppose you might extrapolate from that, well, the over 65s are probably a little bit more stoical. They're probably a little bit more hardy. They're probably a little bit more like, well, you should just get on with it, and, you know, you made your bed, lie in it type attitude. Whereas the younger people are much more caring and sharing about it. They're like, oh, your feelings were hurt, you were made to feel bad, etc. I empathize, I understand that. So I found that really fascinating, and certainly a straw poll amongst people that I know, I would say most people that I know personally living here in London and in the UK are broadly unhappy about the interview, let's say. Now, there's different strands of opinion here, okay? Because this isn't to say that everything expressed in that interview is not true. You know, without doubt, there will be aspects that are true as far as the couple are concerned. There will be aspects that are perhaps misremembered, and there's always those grey areas with any situation, isn't there? You look back on the situation, try to figure out what happens. You know, people are going to have different views. As the palace said, what was the precise wording that they used? Events. There may be differences in recollection of the events. Okay, and clearly that's happened. But regardless, whether you sort of believe them or not, there is unhappiness among certainly most of the people that I have spoken to about this with the interview. And I mean, the key thing about the interview really, and this is the fundamental thing, even if you're completely team Meghan and you're totally on board and everything that she says, you think you take at face value and you completely believe, even if that is your view, why did they have to do it on OPRAH? Why did they have to do it on, with this billionaire talk show host who has one of the biggest shows on the planet? And of course, that broadcast has broken all known records, and it's been watched by so many millions and millions of people. But why do it in the first place? Why do it in the first place? Because even if all of these things that they're saying are true, was it really necessary to go out into the media and to really just launch the cannons on Harry's family, which is really what they did in that interview? Because of course, as people will have pointed out, OPRAH was very well. She didn't pry at all into Meghan's family or the situation. Why is Meghan estranged from her father? Why is she estranged from her family? And all of these things. She didn't pry into that at all. So it was completely directed towards the royal family. And in that sense, it was a very one-sided thing. And it was pretty much, a 2-hour attack on the royal family. Now, I should say, for context, that I'm not particularly, I'm not like a massive royalist or anything like that. To be honest, for most of my life, I've been pretty ambivalent about the whole thing. I was nonplussed when Princess Diana died. I remember when Princess Diana died, I was in Liverpool for some reason. I'd gone out the night before, got really drunk. I woke up on somebody's sofa. The radio was playing in the background. There were people in solemn tones telling me that Princess Diana had died in a car crash in Paris, and I didn't really think anything of it. I just sort of thought, oh, that's kind of unfortunate. And then I thought, right, let's get the beers in, let's get the drinks in. Where's the next party? Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't, and then if you were aware of what happened after that, there was this huge outpouring of public grief. There were people putting flowers in the street. There were crowds in the streets, in the road up to the palace, and all of this kind of crazy stuff happening. And it puzzled me. As much as I was aware of it, because I was just out drinking and partying, but it puzzled me. And there were members of my family who were getting really, really upset about Diana having died. And I just didn't get it, because I was like, well, you didn't know her. She wasn't, sure, it's sad. It's sad if anybody dies, but come on, And the whole country was gripped with this, well, kind of hysteria, I suppose, really, around that incident, and I just wasn't, I just wasn't really interested. I didn't even watch, and that lack of interest in the royal family has continued for most of my life. I didn't actually even watch the Meghan and Harry wedding. Now, maybe you didn't as well, if you're, depending on where you are, but I can tell you this: in the UK, most people watched it, and I remember that day because I went out into Soho because I had to go and I think it was to get some dry cleaning or something like this. This was the day of the wedding, at the time of the wedding. And the streets were absolutely deserted. I think maybe there was a few cafes or bars and they were showing it on screens, but there was nobody around. Everybody was at home watching that wedding. I wasn't. I just couldn't be bothered. I was like, well, I don't care. I mean, I've been joking around as well, going, oh, Harry, he's it's the end for Harry now, blah blah blah, because he's got married, and he was such an eligible bachelor before. He was having such a great time going to Vegas, jumping in the pool naked, meeting all these young fillies and all this kind of stuff. And then he got himself tied down with Meghan, which always seemed to me, I mean, in a kind of joking way, because, you know, he can do what he wants. Anybody can do what they want. Fine. But I was kind of joking, saying, oh, you know, he left that ideal bachelor status that so many people would have dreamed of and tied the knot, you know, with Meghan. But yeah, I didn't watch the wedding. You know, I don't generally watch these sort of royal family based things. So I don't know if in other countries there's a perception that we're all sort of nuts about the royal family here, but that's not the case. Many people are kind of ambivalent, and that's how I've been. I think in recent years I've become slightly more interested, and you know, things like The Crown. I mean, I've watched a few episodes of The Crown, and it's pretty good, and it is kind of interesting. And then you look at the history. You know, I've been reading all this Shakespeare, and obviously the royal family is a very old family. And you look at the history, and you know, and the way this country is constituted, and so on. And I suppose perhaps I've come to appreciate it a little bit more in recent years, but not to any huge degree. So big sort of detour there. But the point is, I'm not coming at this from the perspective of being some huge royalist. It's not like I'm like, oh my God, you know, our sacred family has been besmirched by this this loose lady or anything like that. You know, I'm not really that bothered. But and this is the fundamental thing, really, as far as I'm concerned. Why did they have to go on Oprah and talk about it? And you know, now we have a situation where a large swathes of the population, particularly I would imagine in America, believe that the royal family is institutionally racist, and by extension, they probably believe that Britain is institutionally racist as well. Now, of course, I wasn't there, so and nor was anybody else. So nobody can really comment on what has been said. You know, this conversation that was had about Archie and the skin color. Nobody can really comment on that because we weren't there, and we don't know the context of that conversation. We don't know the tone of it, and so on and so forth. And I mean, listen, you know, if something was said that was negative in the way that is being, I suppose, proposed in that interview, then that's a very, very bad thing. That's a terrible thing, and that needs to be investigated. But the problem is, of course, the couple didn't provide a name. They didn't say who the person who said this thing was, and they didn't reveal any further information. So, as has been pointed out by various columnists and people who've talked about this in the past week, it kind of leaves this stain across the whole monarchy. It leaves this stain across the whole royal family because nobody knows who it was. Now, I believe they've now since come forward and said, well, it's not the Queen and it's not Prince Philip. Okay, so that narrows it down a bit. But, you know, it just leaves this horrible stain over the family. And is the royal family institutionally racist? I would be astonished if that was true in any meaningful sense. I'm not saying that it's impossible that somebody made a comment that was ill-advised and perhaps they shouldn't have made. But I would be astonished. You know, you've got the Queen, who is the head of the Commonwealth. I would be absolutely astonished if it is in any way inherent or sort of within the DNA of the institution as it currently is. And nor is it, by the way, within British society. I mean, British society, of course, you're always going to get idiots. You're always going to get, you know, racist. You're always going to get fringe people around. But by and large, you know, British society, very, very accepting, very, very welcoming, very, very, you know. Now, listen, I'm speaking here as a white middle class male, and so that obviously puts me into a specific category already. And yes, I get the arguments about unconscious bias and blah 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 and all of this stuff. And listen, you know, I don't want to take away from that, but my sense of it is that Britain is not an inherently racist place. And unfortunately, that interview has given the impression that it is, and that it is from the top. But it's done so in a manner that is very hard to dispute and to argue against, because if you attempt to argue against it, then it looks as though you are belittling the lived experience of somebody who has experienced racism, and that is, of course, a very, very bad thing to do. And it goes the same with the mental health side of things as well. Now, Piers Morgan actually, I believe, got into the most trouble for implying that he disbelieved Meghan's claim about her mental health, her feeling suicidal. But to be fair to Piers Morgan, he did clarify that he believed that mental health was really, really incredibly, it's an incredibly serious issue, and it is not, it's not to be disbelieved if somebody claims they're suffering from bad mental health because of a certain situation. That's not to be disbelieved. That's not to be sort of like put out of hand. Okay. But it's problematic, isn't it? Because even if all of these things are exactly as they were presented, and we don't know because none of us were there, but even if they were, why air it all in public? Particularly when you've already left the institution, because, and let's face it, she wasn't there for very long, was she? I mean, she was only there for about 18 months before they started to sort of pull away. But, she came in, she lived there as the Duchess, as part of the family for a period of time. It wasn't to her liking for whatever reason, and they chose to step back. They did what they did. Well, okay, fine. You've done, you didn't like it. You've got out. People had different opinions on that, but now you're out. You're doing what you want to do. So why now bring it all up again? Why now air all this stuff in public? It seems to me in bad taste, and particularly given what's happened in the last 12 months. Because obviously in the last 12 months, the whole world's gone to hell in a handcart, and we have many countries under lockdowns. We have businesses destroyed. We have livelihoods destroyed. We have, a huge uptick actually in mental health issues and suicides and so on and so forth amongst the normal population. And as has been pointed out, and somebody mentioned Douglas Murray, and I've got the article that he wrote here, but we have a millionaire talking to a billionaire about how tough it was, about how terrible it was to enter one of the richest families on the planet. And people will be forgiven for taking umbrage at that, I think, under the current circumstances where there's been so much suffering on such a global level. Now, I'm not, now listen, I mean, I don't know what it's like being, I don't know what Meghan's lived experience is like, obviously. Clearly it wasn't to her liking. Perhaps things, having that negative media attention on you is going to be bad. It's not going to be enjoyable. Okay, fine. But airing it all in that manner so publicly just seemed to me to be in poor taste, and particularly given the timing because of the pandemic, and secondly, Prince Philip himself was actually in hospital. Prince Philip was in hospital, and he'd been in hospital for a number of days. And it was sort of unclear really what was happening. And then the interview goes out. So you've got one of the principal players in this drama who's actually, who's not a young man anymore, in hospital. And then this comes out. And, it just seemed in very, very bad taste. And just really not a classy thing to have done. I think they should have just... Why did they have to do it? Because they were already going to get work. They were going to get the opportunity to do shows. They were going to get the opportunity. I mean, there's no shortage of money. Harry said, well, we did the Spotify deal. We've done the Netflix stuff because I need money to pay for security. And yes, I mean, perhaps he needs to make a buck, but there would have been no shortage of projects for them to do. They didn't have to do this particular thing, and they certainly didn't have to do it at this particular time. And it just doesn't sit very well at all, to put it mildly. And then, of course, we have the bigger issue about Meghan herself and the degree to which Meghan seems to be a trustworthy actor in this. And certainly what I'm sensing in the UK is there is a residual doubt about that amongst segments of the population who feel that there is something somewhat disingenuous about her. I mean, the whole thing was so quick, wasn't it? The whole thing was so fast. You know, like I said, I mean, how long were they even married for before? And how long was she in royal service for before they left? I mean, it was such a short period of time, wasn't it? And then they went to Canada, and did anyone really think that they would stay in Canada? And then they end up in Los Angeles. They're in Los Angeles. How did they end up there? And then, of course, there's this whole question about, well, they said that they didn't like the tabloid press. They didn't like the tabloid press in the United Kingdom, and so they wanted to get away from it. And then they go to Los Angeles, which is hardly, a bastion of solitude and privacy. It's all very troubling, isn't it? It's all very, and this, I think, is why we're looking at those figures that have come out in this poll. And there is this dip in popularity for the couple. And I wonder how this is going to play, because I believe, from what I'm hearing, that this is playing much better in the United States. That in the United States, people are much more on board with what they had to say. But Douglas Murray, who wrote The Strange Death of Europe, amongst other things. I think that his new one is called The Madness of Crowds, I think. The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race and Identity. I read The Strange Death of Europe, and to be honest, I didn't think as much of it as some people do. I thought there was a certain weakness in the argument. I think he's a bit of an old dullard, to be honest. But he's written an article in the New York Post, which is kind of bang on, really, in many ways. He says it's the headline rather is Meghan Markle is a US culture war missile aimed at the heart of Britain and Europe. And he basically says America's culture wars are an export the rest of the world doesn't thank you for, especially as Britons, who are now saddled with a living embodiment of these wars in the figure of Meghan Markle. And that's kind of a piercing insight, isn't it, really, into what's happened? Because you've got this very old institution who is constituted in a certain way, who has a certain way of doing things. And you've had Meghan sort of launched into it, who is really the antithesis of that tradition. She's come from a very liberal-leaning, woke sort of perspective. And those two things together, they're just, it's like oil and water. They just weren't gonna gel very well. And the fallout of it really was that interview with Oprah. And I mean, I remember I watched it in two halves, because I've got a life, so I didn't have time to watch the whole thing in one sitting, but I watched in two halves. And I watched the first half actually a day or so after it actually aired. And it was almost comical, like how dramatic the interview is at the beginning. You've got these close-ups, this soft focus. It's so, and Meghan's there just sort of, just like, oh, it was, let me tell you. And it's almost as though she's describing being in a war zone. It's almost as though she's describing being in, and what she's describing is coming into one of the richest families on earth. And as I said before, I'm not denying that there were not unpleasant aspects to it. I mean, God knows, from the outside, it looks to me like being a royal is pretty damn boring. I mean, you've got to go and open factories. You've got to go and visit schools. You've got to go and visit, it all looks a bit boring, and I get it, but that's what she signed up for. If you're going to marry into that, then, that's what you signed up for. Now, Meghan, of course, claims in the interview that she didn't know what she was signing up for, that she had no idea about any of this. She just met a guy who was cute, Harry, and they fell in love, and it was boy meets girl like in the movies, and then all this royal rigmarole and tradition got in the way, and and that she hadn't signed up for that at all. She hadn't expected that at all. But does anyone really buy that? Does anyone really believe that? I mean, she says that she never Googled Harry. Really? There's something just very odd about the whole thing. And as I say, I think this adds to this somewhat negative feeling that has now emerged around the couple. I can certainly say, I mean, in the UK, loads and loads of memes going around about it, loads and loads of people, sending jokes and things like this. I think there is certainly from what I'm seeing, there is a large sense of skepticism around the whole thing. So whether around the facts of what was said, or just around the very fact of having done the interview, there is certainly skepticism on outside of the discourse of the mainstream media, because of course within the mainstream media, well, not all of the mainstream media actually, but within the discourse of a lot of the mainstream media, obviously, they take the side of Meghan and Harry. But I think away from that, you're seeing a lot of skepticism, which is really, really interesting. Let's have a look at some of the comments anyway. Renee, and this is a different topic, says, I was just wondering about the definition, the relationship terms. Could you explain the difference between the concept of friends with benefits and an open long-term relationship? Well, I mean, friends with benefits tends to just be a very, very casual thing. You've met the person, you like having sex with them, and that's it. And it never develops at all. An open LTR sounds a bit more like you've progressed somewhat further. So you do have a bond with this woman. You do have shared things that you like, you perhaps enjoy. It's not just based on sex, maybe it's based on a little bit more than that. You like to spend some time together, you have common interests, whatever, you can talk, blah, blah, blah. But you've chosen to keep things open so that I guess both of you, or certainly maybe you, or you and her, or however you're managing it, can bring other, have sex with other people. I think it's different in that sense. I think the friends with benefit scenario never really gets as far as being a proper relationship. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement, if you like. Whereas an LTR, I think it's gone a little bit further, and there's a bit more of a genuine relationship there, albeit one that you've chosen to keep open. So that's what I would say. Adam Simmons says, get her on fresh and fit. The lie detector test. Absolutely. There's some comments about something that's happened in London recently. What will happen on the streets in London after complaints from women? Please explain. I don't know. I know what you're referring to. I don't know. We will have to wait and see. Certainly, that is something that is in the news at the moment. Carlos says, what's so wrong with these Windsors with a second-hand American divorcee? A king, a proclaimed queen leaves the kingdom for these ones now, this prince. Yes, I don't really know. I mean, and to be honest, I mean, I don't think that really Harry, I think Harry could have done better. That sounds harsh. That sounds crude. But you know what I'm saying? I think Harry could have had his pick, really, and whether Meghan was the right choice, I don't know. I mean, it would. I guess we have to see how things pan out. But at the moment, it seems. I mean, she's basically estranged him from his family, hasn't she? I think they'll let him back. I think if things hit the fan, you know, I imagine there'll always be a bed for him at Buckingham Palace, but you know, she has isolated him really from his family, and that is not something that fills me with joy, to be honest. It seems a great shame. I mean, I've heard people saying, well, Harry wanted to get out of the royal family, but it was interesting in that interview, wasn't it? Because he describes Prince Charles and Prince William, so his brother and his father, he describes them as being trapped. He says, yes, they're trapped in it. They can't get out. And then Oprah says, well, were you trapped? That sounds like you were trapped then. And he sort of pauses, and then he says, well, I didn't realize I was trapped until Meghan told me that I was trapped. And that's a bit problematic, isn't it? That's a bit problematic. You know, it's sort of like, oh, well, I didn't know that I was living in such a terrible situation until this person who's now taken me to Los Angeles told me that I was living in a terrible situation. What do you think of that? That just sounds a little bit suspect to me. That doesn't sound too healthy. Ian says, a life. How dare you? I know, ridiculous, right? Can't believe that I could actually not even have time to watch this nonsense. And by the way, listen, I mean the bigger side of things here, the wider question here is that all of this is nonsense anyway. I mean, this is all bread and circuses, isn't it? Really, this is all just entertainment, fodder for the masses. You know, we're sitting around here discussing, you know, these millionaires and the argument that they've had with their millionaire family, and the fact that it was discussed with a billionaire on primetime television when the UK is closed, when business, you know, hundreds of thousands of businesses in the UK are closed, when people are queuing up at food banks, when we are borrowing trillions and trillions of pounds in order to pay for what's happening. And this is happening, of course, in countries across the world. So the wider context, if you take a step back, is that all of this is nonsense, of course, anyway. You know, it's a distraction. I'm not saying it's a deliberate distraction. It's not like in 1984 where it's manufactured, but it is a distraction, isn't it? Because all of this is obviously nonsense. But in a sense, that's what makes the interview so jarring for some people, because you're thinking, well, like I said before, you're thinking there are people in tower blocks in London, down the road from here. There are people in tower blocks that probably they can't sell if they own it because of the cladding, because of the fire at Grenville the other year. So now all these buildings, these unsafe flats that you can't leave and you can't sell. There are people in those tower blocks with families who've been there for months because they're not allowed to go out, and they're educating their children at home, or trying to, you know, through the computer. And we're all sitting here thinking about these millionaire, you know, the terrible problems of having to Google how to curtsy and having to Google the national anthem that Meghan had to go through. I mean, on that level, it's absurd, given the wider context of what's happening in society. But nevertheless, it's still interesting, and the wokeness factor of this is interesting to discuss. Let me just go through these comments to see what else we've got here. Would you ever walk if you got confronted like Piers did? Well, to be honest, I don't really know why he walked at that point. I need to watch the clip again, really. I saw it on Monday or whenever it was, but it didn't seem like Alex Beresford, who's the weather guy that confronted him. It didn't seem like it was that bad at first. I don't really know why Piers did walk at that moment. People were saying, "Oh, was it sort of staged? Was it premeditated? Was it set up?" They are denying that, but apparently, Piers has been in conversations with some other media companies about work. So was he going to go anyway, and he just did it for the lols? I don't really know. I don't really know. You know, he's normally pretty thick-skinned, so I'm not quite sure why he did. I mean, would I? I wouldn't have said I would, but you know, perhaps he was just in a particularly bad mood that day. But I mean, Piers is a strange character as well, because Piers basically keeps banging on the fact that he was mates with Meghan for a while. He was friends with Meghan for a while when she first came to London, and then, according to him, for some reason, she just cut him off and she just stopped speaking to him. And ever since then, he's had this massive bee in his bonnet about Meghan. And he's kind of like, yeah, because she blew you out, mate. She rejected you. I don't think it was a sexual thing or anything like that. But he was supposedly friends with her. She was in his circle, and then she just cut him off and disappeared. And apparently now she complained about his outbursts about her on the program, which led to him being got rid of. But it did seem like he had a somewhat personal thing about Meghan. But also, to be honest, he was kind of saying what a lot of other people were thinking. You know, not many people and I'm not a massive Piers Morgan fan anyway, to be honest, because Piers Morgan was very vocal on the subject of the pandemic, and he has always been very vocal in support of lockdowns, and that has always, as someone skeptical of blanket lockdowns as being, you know, the best solution to what's happening, that's always been tricky for me, you know. And I mean, he was one of the people in this country who was like, every morning he'd be on that show banging on about, no, look at the cases, we need to do something, the government needs to do something, let's lock down, you know. So, you know, I'm not the world's biggest Piers Morgan fan, but nevertheless, I think he's right on some things. And I think, to be honest, you know, many people feel that the way that he views Meghan and the way that he views that relationship is probably closer to the truth than some other more rose-tinted views of it. What else have we got here? Meghan was already divorced. Proof that she's not able to pair bond. Well, yes. I mean, it's certainly not ideal, is it? It's certainly not ideal. And if you're Prince Harry, when you kind of had the pick, really, why did you go for a divorcee? Why did you go for a divorcee who's older than you? Adam Simmons says, this is about young people being Team Harry and Meghan. He says that's because young people are inexperienced, clueless fuckwits. That is a unbiased, non-partisan view there. Thank you for that. A Chang says, hello, sir. Meg, Ian says, I want to leave the royal family. I don't want the media attention. Also, Meg, let's go on Oprah. Yes, exactly. You know. She's a raging narcissist and he's her hollowed out victim. Yes, and I think, well, that's an interesting point of view. And I think this is something that Rollo was actually talking about on his show. Rollo was talking about on his channel the other night. And you can certainly look at it from that perspective. Ian says, whatever they do is up to them. I'm amazed people are like, oh, my God, the oldest and most established UK family is a little bit reactionary. Shocker. Welcome to the real world. Well, that's true. That's true. But there's a couple of things here. My perspective, my just gut feeling on this. There's a couple of things. Firstly, and Piers Morgan pointed this out on Good Morning Britain, and he was right. When you look at the media coverage from the early part of Meghan and Harry's courtship, when they were dating, when they were together, and then they got engaged and whatever, it was very, very positive. It really, really was very positive. You know, they really, really welcomed Meghan with open arms. And I think everybody felt, and I felt to some extent, this is great because we've got some, like, we've got Kate and Wills who are great, but a little bit boring, you know, a little bit dull now. But now we've got this younger couple who are, you know, quite cool. You know, she's from Hollywood. She's, you know, and yes, her background, and yes, her ethnic background. Yes, this is cool because this is going to update the monarchy. This is going to bring the monarchy into the Instagram era. You know, we might even get the monarchy on TikTok with these guys. This is making it cool again. And I think there was a general feeling in the country of warmth towards Meghan and welcoming towards Meghan. People were very enthusiastic. You've got to look at some of that early coverage. That's not to say that it didn't turn somewhat sour later, but there's always two sides to the story. I mean, then stories started to come out about Meghan's alleged prima donna-ness, sort of like a lot of fussing about. I mean, apparently they changed the wedding song 30 times or something. There was a lot of sort of very starry, prima donna-y type behavior, and there's these allegations about Meghan bullying staff members at the palace and female staff members having to leave employment at the palace because they were bullied. There's some pretty disturbing stories about that going around, which have been denied by Meghan and their side of things, but I believe are still to be investigated. And then the coverage did start to turn. But if you looked at that initial coverage, it was very, very, very positive. The other thing to say is that England and Britain is an incredibly, incredibly class-ridden society. And to be honest, because listen, here's the other thing, right? So Kate Middleton, who's now the Duchess of Cornwall, married to William, she's pretty posh, really, but she's from a upper middle class, rather than aristocratic background. And she got a lot of stick in the press when they were girlfriend and boyfriend, and then when they were engaged, and they called her Weighty Katie and everything like that, because Wills didn't want to put a ring on it for ages. But her family, I think, were in business, and they did something like it was something weird, like they supplied goods that you could buy for parties, like maybe paper plates and napkins, and I don't know, I'm making it up, but they had some kind of strange, but anyway, it was business. They were a commercial family, and I think they'd done well, and they'd made money, and they were quite well off, but they weren't aristocracy. And so there was a lot of snidiness about Kate from the family. Not particular individuals, but there was certainly snidiness, and in the press, of sort of like, Katie, is she really good enough? Is she really good enough to be a princess? And that's what you got to bear in mind. And so when Meghan comes along, I mean, Meghan's American, and I'm sorry to probably 99% of people who are watching this now, but like the British aristocracy and Americans, it's still a bit of a really one of those American chaps, really. Oh, I say. So just for being American, she probably would have faced some, I don't even want to say negativity, but there's snobbishness. There is snobbishness in British society. Okay, so just being American, she also didn't. She came from a fairly, not wealthy background. She was an actress. An actress, you say? Really? I mean, it was in Victorian times. Actresses, if you look at Victorian novels like The Picture of Dorian Gray, for example, the actresses in that are depicted as little better than hookers. That was the attitude towards actresses, albeit 100 years ago. But, all of these things. And she's a divorcee. It's like, oh, she's American. She's a divorcee. She's an actress, God damn it. And she's not from a rich family. My God. So my gut feeling about this, and the race thing, I would say doesn't come anywhere near that stuff. I would say that probably the biggest problem she would have had would have been snobbery around class more than anything else. And as I said, it seemed to me in the early stages that actually her ethnic background was an advantage. It appeared to be an advantage because people thought, this is cool. We're getting an injection of, youthful vitality and, into this rather boring, stuffy old family. So I think people need to look at the class aspects of this and to consider that if there was negativity directed towards her. But I mean, how much negativity was there within the family directed towards her? I mean, she says in the interview that everyone was really nice to her at first. She says everyone was really nice to her at first. The Queen was really welcoming. Kate was really welcoming. Wills was really welcoming. Yeah. You know, Charles loved her. Charles was a big fan of Meghan. So, and she, within that interview, they don't really explain when the negativity within the family came in. Sure, there was negativity in the press, and that in itself is you know, it's no fun to be being slagged off all the time by people that you don't know in the press. But she says that she felt not supported. Seems to be their key complaint. But I'm not getting a sense of where negativity from within the family was supposedly coming at her. And I'm not convinced that it was, really. Because even now in the public statements that they make, the family said, look, we will always love them. They're a part of our family, blah, blah, blah. So it seems like the main issue was with certain aspects of the media. Rather than the family itself. Or if it was within the family, she hasn't really explained who and why and what the details really are. Ian says, I don't wish ill on them, but people need to grow up and stop living vicariously through this public soap opera. And yes, again, taking a step back, it is all nonsense. This is all bollocks, because these people are millionaires. Oprah Winfrey is a billionaire. She's probably reclining now on a bed made out of cash, made out of dollar bills, from the money that she's generated through doing that interview. I mean, these people are having a great time, you know, and they have no problems. And we're all just sitting here talking about it. People who love the royals have it very close to the top of their political priorities. For people who really don't care, it's way down the list. I would agree with that, actually. In Britain, and Ian is a Brit, most of us aren't really that bothered. I think it tends to be an older demographic who are really into the royal family. And even my mum, I was talking to my mum earlier, and she's not that bothered about them. Certainly your grandparents probably would have been a bit more. As I say, as I've got older, I've started to be a little bit more interested in it, but not in any major way. And then you get people who are anti-royal. You get people like Morrissey, who's always a very outspoken anti-royalist. Yes, I mean they didn't get paid for the Oprah interview, apparently, but although people are claiming, actually somebody's saying they got paid $7 million. It said on the interview they didn't get paid, but it certainly got them a ton of exposure, and it's not going to do them any harm at all. Mark, hello, Mark. How are you? Are you back? Are you back in Malta? He says the crown is very well made. Unknown says that you're doing okay. Not too bad. I've been a little bit under the weather this week. Don DeMarco says, now that we're older and can appreciate how easily influenced society can be, we care about history and stuff like this. Yeah, I mean, you know, like I care about it more. I'm more interested in it now. And, you know, the reason I'm even talking about this is like it's my country and it's our history and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, there is value in that. But, you know, I think I was astonished. When I went to Moscow. When was it? A couple of years ago. And there were magazines in the supermarket in Moscow with pictures of Meghan and Harry on the front. And I'm thinking, this is mental. Like, you guys are really, really interested in the British royal family. I was really surprised. So I think actually the royal obsession goes beyond just Britain. I think the run-of-the-mill guy in Britain doesn't really, you know, whatever. They're not really that bothered. But it's a whole huge brand, isn't it? And it's a global brand, really. Unknown says USA is rather dirty. UK is noble. End of story. Well, I'm sure people will have different views on that. It's all staged. In the near future, the climax will be the return of Harry. I kind of hope so, because I think we all have a certain. I mean, it says in that poll that people are less. Harry's popularity is declining, but I think we're all fairly affectionate towards Harry, and probably Harry and William, really, because of course, you know, there was the death of Diana, and there was them walking behind the coffin at the funeral and everything, and you know, I mean, you kind of grow up with them, don't you? I mean, I'm older than them, but nevertheless, you know, I remember when they were little kids, and now they're grown men, and you know, you have this sense of knowing them, and it does, just on that level, it does seem, it's a bit like if a mate of yours or a friend of a friend, and they get into this weird relationship with somebody, and you're not sure about them, you're going to have that sort of feeling of like, oh, that's a bit, I'm not sure about that, and I think that's how a lot of us feel about Harry, really, because Harry was, you know, nobody ever met him. I remember actually working in Kensington at one stage, and apparently they used to hang out around there. And I do remember a girl going on the lunch break, and then she came back and she said, "Oh, I just saw Harry and Marks and Spencer's." So they were around, and they would go to the clubs in London and things like this. So it's almost like you think they were sort of around. They were sort of part of the extended sort of social group in London, and it's almost like anybody that you kind of. I mean, I didn't know him. I don't know what I'm saying now, but it's a bit like if you heard about anybody that was somewhat even remotely connected to you, and they were in this like kind of dodgy situation, you would think, I don't know about that. That sounds a bit bad. Poor bloke, you know. And I think that's how many of us feel in the UK about Harry, because, as I say, there is that sort of affection there for those guys. UK does class, USA does race. Yeah, I mean, you know, make no mistake. I mean, there has certainly been racism in the United Kingdom, and no doubt there still is in small pockets. But I think by and large, if you come here, it's not something you see. Certainly in London, which of course everyone knows, very multicultural, blah blah blah. You know, it's really not a thing. Certainly not in a big way. Now, of course, as I say, you can then get into the conversation about unconscious bias and so on and so forth. But I mean, in a big way, it's certainly not a thing. JC says, do you think there's a threshold of attention beyond which the ego goes crazy or disconnected for guys and girls? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think there is, but I think the issue, the central issue that we have here is Meghan a social climber? That would be the old-fashioned term, wouldn't it? Is she not a gold digger as such, but is she a social climber? Is she somebody who has seen an opportunity to raise her profile, to go stellar, and she's taken that opportunity, or is she acting in good faith? And I think that's the fundamental problem that people have. And you get somebody like Piers Morgan, who basically, in so many words, thinks she's a social climber. In fact, maybe he's even used that expression. He thinks she's a social climber. Now, that is a view that is almost verboten in the UK media, because it lays you open to charges of racism and other things like that. But if this was a Victorian novel, that would be the theme of the novel. You know, is this person an agent who has come into a scenario not necessarily with everyone's best interests at heart? And is Meghan an interloper who has come in and used manipulation in order to get certain things that she wanted? Or is she somebody who just genuinely really loves Harry, and things didn't work out for her, and, you know, they had to make some life changes? And that, I think, is the fundamental problem. But what makes it tricky is that it's become very difficult to discuss that question without getting shut down, without getting shut down on social media. Don DeMarco says Meghan's an actress. She could act for money. Blah, blah, blah. Need to push forward through these a bit. Mark says race is class in America due to history and lack of social mobility, but all they see is the color. That is an interesting viewpoint. EC Smooth says, I think she's a snake. I feel bad for young Harry. Well, you know, I messaged a guy that I know earlier in the week, and he's in his 60s. I think he's over 65. He may even be pushing 70. He's a guy I know. And I said, Meghan Markle, are you buying it? And he came back and he said, no, he is a fool. Sleep well. Because I guess it was night. So yes, I think that is a view that is actually not uncommon in the United Kingdom. It's just that people aren't really saying it because because it's a bad thing to it's perceived as being a bad thing to say. She's mad and she's not even pretty. What was Harry thinking of? What about Lady Diana? What about her? I'm not sure about this one. Gerard Perry says, isn't Oprah a good example of the different priorities of men and women? If she were a man, there would be millions of women of all ages interested in pursuing that person. Do you mean Oprah? Do you mean Oprah herself would be flooded with admirers if she was a man? Is that what you mean? I'm not sure. Mark is back in lockdown. Any travel plans for yourself? Well, watch this space is all I can say at the moment. Let's see if I can get out of the country because it's currently illegal to leave the UK. So, yeah. Marvel says, what's your guess on how the relationship is going to end? How long before she gives him the boot? Harry's never going to wake up, is he? Well, look, I don't know. I'm afraid. I don't have a good feeling about it, though. I'm afraid. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up splitting. I spoke to another friend. He said I give the marriage 2 years because I kind of feel like she's now taken him outside of his. He's now become something different to what he was when she married him. And my fear is that she is going to lose interest, and that is going to lead to the slow, or maybe even not so slow, decline of the relationship, and it's not going to end very well. And to be honest, I hope that doesn't happen, because I think when you've done something like this on such a big scale, when you have left a family and your tradition and responsibility, all that stuff, responsibilities, I mean, sod that. But, when you've left your family, you've left your job, you've made such a big song and dance about it, and then if it doesn't work out, that's a really bad situation to wind up in. So I kind of hope that it does work out, but I don't have a good feeling about it, is all I can say. I was going to actually just make a final point. Somebody said to me the other day, and they made a very good point. Somebody said, well, listen, you're all about, freedom and do what you want, and to hell with, renegade lifestyle, to hell with the rules, blah, blah, blah. And isn't that what Meghan and Harry did? Because they were in a situation they didn't like, so they just got the hell out. So this person said, shouldn't you be on Team Meghan and Harry? Because they're just embodying your philosophy, if you like. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, in a way, you're right. Because in a way, I've always been talking about this small L libertarian stance, where you basically look after number one, you do what you're going to do, to hell with the rules, 48 laws of power if you have to, get out of situations you don't want to be in, etc., etc. But I do also feel that if you say you're going to do something, if you set yourself up to do something, you should do it. Or at least you should give it a damn good go. And look, Meghan married into the royal family. She married a prince. And she claims not to know what that meant. She claims not to have understood that you had to curtsy to the Queen and all this kind of stuff. But that seems to be unrealistic. And look, I think if you put yourself up for something, then you should kind of do it, right? Because otherwise, what kind of, otherwise, what is that? Where does that leave you as a person? You're just a flake. You're just sort of, oh, I dabbled in this and then I didn't really like it, so I went and did this. No, I think you should, if you're going to do something, you should damn well do it. And, she married him of her own free will. Nobody forced her to. And, it was a very, very short period of time before they were backing out of the door. And it just seems to me. I saw somebody earlier talking about this and saying that millennials. I heard on a podcast actually. Somebody said millennials. And sorry for my millennial viewers here. Millennials just, if they don't like the job, they jack the job in. If you don't like the relationship, jack the relationship in. If you don't like this, just jack it in. And there doesn't seem to be that grit. There doesn't seem to be that sort of like, right, I've said I'm going to do this. I'm going to stick in and I'm going to do it. And so I think that's what troubled me about it. I mean, in a broader sense, yeah, they didn't like the royal family. They got out. Okay, fine. That bit is, I'm less bothered about that. I mean, I'm bothered about it because it concerns me on Harry's behalf, but I'm less bothered about that bit. The bit that really bothers me is why go on TV and basically stick it to your family for 2 hours on some huge, huge, massive show that's seen by millions of people all over the planet. Was that really the right thing to do? And regardless of, the veracity or otherwise of these assertions, which are unproven, by the way, and are to some degree unprovable, but they are smears, they are assertions which paint the royal family and by extension the rest of the country in a very poor light. Is it right to make those on primetime television, or would it be better to have just sorted things out in private? And and ultimately, you're out of the situation, so don't make a big song and dance about it. And yes, it may be the case that they weren't paid for that interview, but make no mistake, that interview certainly has value as an economic entity because it's going to make them a lot of money in other ways because of the boost to their profile that it gave. So, what millennial bashing here? I feel offended now. Sorry, pretty fly Afro guy. I mean, listen, I don't know. I'm quoting someone else. It's not my fault, Gov, honest. What would you rate Meghan on a scale of 1 to 10? I don't know. She's not really my bag, to be honest. I wouldn't. She's not really my. I'm not massively aesthetically attracted to her. Is Prince Harry the king of simps? Does it make a strong case studies for the consequences of being led? Well, certainly he's in her frame, isn't he? I mean, we talk all the time about frame and, having strong frame and all the rest of it. And there is no doubt that Harry is in her frame. Now, you might say, well, but he's happy though, as my girlfriend said. She said, oh, but he looks happy and blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe he is at the moment. I don't know. But is it going to work out? And only time will tell. But as I say, I got a bad feeling about it. Does Troy own crypto? Yes. And I'm in Charlie's crypto course as well, so I'll be studying hard next week. But yes, I do own some crypto. Yes. Gus says, I see a divide between men and women, or at least racism is a waste of time for anyone. Well, yes, I'd agree with that. When you say divide between men and women, I guess you mean a difference between men and women. Easy smooth. She blew her own family up. Now she starts on the Royals. Bad situation. It's just a. What are your thoughts on the bird poop dress? Yeah, it's just a bit of a sad state of affairs, really, isn't it? I mean, it certainly looks like that, doesn't it? It certainly looks like that. And Douglas Murray, in this article, he says, for years, Markle has had virtually no relationship with any of her own family. It seems that she wants to ensure that her husband, Prince Harry, similarly has no relations with his. She has sought to sever his blood ties through the medium of Oprah Winfrey. He also makes an interesting point about the allegations of racism. He says that if there had been anything more concrete, then she would have revealed it. So why didn't she? Well, because, I suppose his implication is that there was less in it than perhaps was being presented. Just having a look to see if there's anything else here. Yeah, okay. Well, I think, there's an interesting article, though. You should have a look at that. The Douglas Murray article in the New York Post. It's online. You can find that easily. Yes, well, no doubt I'll be back with that. Thanks for a good chat, says Ian. I can go back to ignoring the whole thing. Absolutely. I think that is the sensible way forward. Declan says, do you think US dating will mirror Japan's at some point, i.e. a bunch of herd men and spinster women? Is Japan the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the world? That's an interesting question. You need to ask John MLD about that, really. But, I mean, the way that he describes it is that actually it's not quite as pronounced as we think in the West. We think, there's all these herb guys sitting around at home, fapping or whatever they're doing, and nobody's dating. But the way that John describes it is that actually Japanese men are very, for the most part, very alpha, and they're going out and bossing it and doing what they want to do and blah, blah, blah. So I would need to learn more about Japanese culture, but I certainly think there are unique challenges and stresses within the dating marketplace, and they're not going to go away anytime soon. In fact, they're going to be exacerbated as we go forward. And Declan says, I saw you on Rule Zero. Good content sub. Thanks, mate. Very much appreciated. All right, look, so I'm going to leave it for today. But on the note of the dating marketplace and the challenges, etc., if you want to learn more about that, I've got a collection of 11 books called Renegade Dating Blueprint. It's available on the link that's in the description below. So if you want to support this show, because I don't do ads, don't have super chats. So if you do want to support me on the show, grab that collection of books. Really helps me out. And to be honest, there's 11 books in there. There's a ton of information in there that I put together over years and years of dating and going out and doing game and having lots of adventures and things. So you can read all of that on the link below. Do hit subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications bell. Really helps me out. Give me a comment, give me a like, give me a dislike, anything you want below. Tickle the algorithm. And we will be doing Rule Zero tomorrow. I believe it's on John MLD's channel. That's Modern Life Dating. And we are going to be discussing the same thing. We're going to be discussing more about Meghan, Harry, and all of that good stuff. So I will see you over there tomorrow. That's it from me for now. And I'll see you back on here next week. Have a great weekend, guys. See you soon.